Hello, welcome to today's Power Lunch. We are talking about overcoming imposter syndrome. It's a big word. Imposter syndrome as a consultant, so you can stop feeling like a fraud. If we haven't met yet, I am Melissa Lieberman. I am a business development coach and career coach who is an expert in helping independent consultants and tech leaders achieve their big goals. And to that end, I've helped countless clients grow and scale their tech career and their IC businesses. And I created this lunch in order to share best practices with you. So that it's not just my one-on-one clients that are getting this content, although a lot of them are on these calls every week, so they get a double dose. All right, so today's focus is going to be how to overcome imposter syndrome as a consultant so you can stop feeling like a fraud. We're going to focus on, number one, understanding and recognizing how to identify imposter syndrome and if you have it. And then we're going to talk about a 6-step process to overcome imposter syndrome that doesn't require you to take any more classes or get any more certification. And then I'm going to walk you through 3 case studies so you can really see how imposter syndrome shows up and how to overcome it. And then we'll talk at the end about the formula that will help you just very quickly recognize and overcome imposter syndrome and put this topic today into action. So if you are here live, you can put questions in the Q&A box. If you want to say anything more informal, you can put that in the chat. If you're watching the replay to this on YouTube, then you can definitely leave me comments or questions, and I will come back and answer those there. So with that, let's start off with what is imposter syndrome. Basically, it's essentially an intellectual form of self-doubt. It comes up so often when I talk to people about when they're trying to implement new goals, especially, or try something new, expand into new areas of consulting, or start out with consulting the first time, or start working with a brand new client. It's a pattern where you're doubting your skills, your talents, your accomplishments, even though those are documented sometimes on paper very easily documented and understood and seen because they're in the past. We still have a tendency as humans to doubt those or discount those. And we have this fear of being exposed. Like someone's going to find out I don't actually know what I should know as a consultant. They're paying me a lot of money to do something. And what happens if they find out I don't know everything? So the other way you might hear this being referred to is fraud complex, imposter syndrome, fraud complex. And at the end, I'll share with you a questionnaire that'll help you gauge how much imposter syndrome you have. And it comes in waves, right? Sometimes people, especially if you're doing something new, it can go really high, and then you get more comfortable with that and it goes low, and then back up again. So it's not a static situation. It's also not a syndrome. So just to be very clear about this, we're not talking about anything that requires therapy. This is a term that's created that is used very frequently in a non-therapeutic psychological way. Just want to be clear on that because I am not a therapist. So with that, we're going to dive in and talk about, I think this really helps people too, who gets imposter syndrome. And in doing research on this, studies come back and say around 70% of people experience some form of imposter syndrome in their career, at some point in their career. So it's a very high likelihood that you either have this kind of as a ongoing thing or situationally. So if you're in that situation, just know that you're not alone, that this happens very frequently, and I'm going to share with you the tools today to work through it, to know you have it, and then to work through it and overcome it. Because the answer to overcoming it isn't just, I'm going to keep working until I feel like I'm not an imposter. It's actually the opposite of that. And we'll dive into what that process looks like in a minute. The first thing I want to do is just give you some questions to help you decide or define whether you have imposter syndrome, kind of more of on an ongoing basis as like an underlying thread, or more situationally. So let's ask ourselves these questions as we go through this checklist with you today. Number one, do you discount the importance of what you've done in the past? Like, take a note for yourself. Are you doing this? Do you notice when someone says, congratulations on that award you won? And you say, oh yeah, it was great, but it's a team effort. Or it wasn't really that big of a deal. Or you went live with a really big project and I could do that in my sleep. Do you discount the importance of what you've done? Number two, are you afraid that others will discover that, like, how much knowledge or ability you really lack? You kind of worry to put yourself out there, and you kind of hesitate and tiptoe or do it very methodically or in a paced out way. Not because that's the best way to potentially drive adoption. It's because I'm really nervous. I don't want anyone to find out that I don't know what I should know. Number three, do you compare your ability with that of those around you? So you might be thinking to yourself like, oh, that person, I wish I was as smart as they are. I wish I was as good at networking as they are. I wish that I had this MBA that they have. I wish that I was as articulate in meetings as they are. All those comparisons. Number four, are you afraid that that people who are really important to you, maybe clients or people who sponsor you or seem to be your, a mentor or an advocate, are going to find out you're not as capable as you think they think you are? Number six, maybe number five. I should have numbered these. Doesn't matter. Do you hesitate to believe when someone gives you praise or recognition? Do you brush it off? Tell them it wasn't good enough, or feel kind of shame almost that they're giving you this feedback, like you didn't deserve it? The next one, do you dread client feedback? You want to have the feedback, but you're also dreading it because you're worried it's going to bring up things that you didn't realize that might not have been at the level that you were expecting to deliver at, and you feel embarrassed and like this is a confirmation that you're not good enough. And lastly, do you think you've attained your current success because somehow you just happened to be in the right place at the right time, or you knew the right people? It wasn't you who accomplished this success. It was something external to you. These are all signs of kind of an ongoing imposter syndrome. I told you I would share the test at the end. I took this a few weeks ago, or I think back in January. This was my score. Kind of high. Kind of high because I am constantly pushing the limit of what I know, what I don't know, trying new things. Like, you can see my new podcast microphone here, constantly pushing that envelope. And so it's there. It's not a bad thing to have this. It's just not a bad thing if you don't know you have it and are operating from that place. So we're not here to make the imposter syndrome go away. In a lot of cases, it's a good thing to have, because it means that you're really pushing the envelope of and learning and growing at a faster pace. But what we are here to do is help you to make sure you're aware of what's happening, that imposter syndrome, and then able to manage it. So now let's dive into asking yourself about, you may not have kind of ongoing imposter syndrome, but perhaps situational imposter syndrome. So you might be generally confident and secure in things that are familiar, in things that feel comfortable, in things that feel, like you've done it before. But you might have and notice this fraud complex in certain situations, like new and unfamiliar situations, like high pressure situations, or potentially situations where you're interacting with people that you feel have more power or influence, like a C-suite or something like that. So you're fine day to day interacting with the people that you're consulting with, but then when you have to go interact with the sponsors, it may be that you're all of a sudden this really rears its head. So with that, what the first thing that I want to, so number one, we figured out those questions that will help you to identify if you've got fraud complex or imposter syndrome situationally or more ongoing or both. Could be both. And then the next thing to do is, after asking yourself those questions, is use feelings as an indicator that this could be going on. So if you notice, and we don't really talk about feelings very often in the corporate world, right? It's like feelings are bad. Have a neutral feeling or perhaps a positive feeling, but never have a negative feeling. And if you do, definitely don't tell anyone about it, right? That's kind of the socialization. But what I'm here to suggest to you is you can use these feelings as an indicator for you, like a first indicator, like the indicator light, right? That you're potentially heading down the road of some form of imposter syndrome. Whether that's feeling self-doubt, like a constriction in your throat or your chest, whether it's feeling inadequate, like some pit in your stomach, or incompetent, or anxious, like your whole body is kind of feeling nervous, or distrust, like looking at people and wondering what they're thinking of you and being skeptical and distrustful and paranoid about them, like those kinds of feelings, or panic, like a whole body constriction, right? Whatever that looks like for you. Everyone's feelings show up in a different way, but really getting in tune with that and using them as a first indicator can be so powerful versus just brushing them aside and thinking, oh, I shouldn't be feeling incompetent, I better keep moving forward. You can really leverage these as a flag to say something's going on and I need to really take a moment and dig into this further. And so the way that this plays out, essentially, if you were to just keep the imposter syndrome going, kind of letting it run rampant, is that first you start thinking about how you're not qualified. That's what creates this imposter syndrome. Thinking about what is wrong with you, what's missing, what's inadequate, what's incompetent, all those thoughts about ourselves that we as humans tend to think at different points in our life and our career. And then our brain is trained to go find so when you're thinking this, our brain is trained to go find the evidence of how you're right. Obviously, this is not serving us, right? It doesn't help to go think this thing that isn't good about ourselves, and then our brain runs off rampant and goes and finds evidence to prove you right. So now we've got a layer on top of this of evidence now based on what you've been thinking. And based on that, it creates this feeling of self-doubt or a feeling of inadequacy, whatever that looks like for you, anxiety. And then from that place, imagine you're showing up in a boardroom, you're showing up with your stakeholders, you're showing up with when you're selling your consulting services. When you're coming at this from a place of self-doubt or inadequacy or panic or anxiety, you're definitely not going to show up as powerfully, as confidently, and you end up undermining yourself. Again, it's not because you're missing something. It's not because you don't have the right skill set or the experience or the certificates or whatever it is. It's because of how you're looking at yourself. that you put yourself in that zone of an imposter or a fraud versus thinking about where you are qualified. And so you undermine yourself and you appear less qualified than you really are. All because of your brain, which is great news because you can control that. This whole cycle is under your control, and it does not require any more certificates or anything. It requires you to get control of the way you're thinking about yourself and seeing where you are qualified versus letting your brain run rampant on where you're not qualified and where someone might find out that you're not what what you're saying you are. So let's now talk about the steps to overcome imposter syndrome. This is the 6-step process I was mentioning to you. So number 1, acknowledging that imposter syndrome without judgment. So again, we can use our feelings as an indicator to say your throat is constricting or your chest is tightened up. Like, oh, something's happening here. I'm probably thinking that someone's going to find out that I'm not good enough for this. Whatever it looks like for you. And just know or notice yourself thinking like, oh, someone else is better, or someone else should have had this job, not me, or I shouldn't present to the C-suite. I'm going to have my client do it internally because I don't think I'm good enough. All of those things that a lot of us think about ourselves. Remember, my score is almost in red, so I'm doing this too. And acknowledge that you have it without judgment. It's so normal to have this. So the key here is like, no problem. Here you are again. Nice to see you. Let's now work through it. So the second step is identifying those thoughts that are making you feel like a fraud, that are making you feel inadequate or incompetent. The thoughts like, I'm not as good as so-and-so, or they're going to find out I'm not good. They're going to figure out that I'm not worth this rate. Whatever those thoughts are, they are not facts. They are you creating a story in your mind about some catastrophic event. And then your brain looking for evidence to support that. And so to counteract that, you ask yourself, how is this thought not true? If you're thinking, so-and-so is better than me, they should have hired them instead, how is that not true? Because there's evidence you can find on both sides. I promise you. You can find evidence on both sides. And so why on earth would you focus on the evidence that is against you? It does you no good, and it really does the client no good because you're focused on what's wrong with you. A good chunk is, I'm sure, is imaginary because that's just how we are, versus focused on what you have to offer and what you are bringing to the table. And then ask yourself, out of all of that, what do you want to believe about you? You get to decide. Are you going to sit there believing all the shitty thoughts that you have? Or are you going to believe the thoughts that make you feel confident, that prove to you you've done this before, maybe just in a slightly different way, that show you that you have 90% or 95% of what you need, and you're someone who can figure out the rest? What are you going to focus on? Because as that saying goes, I always butcher it, but what we focus on, we find. If you're focused on what's wrong with you, you're going to find a bunch of reasons. If you focus on what you have to offer and the value, you're going to find a lot of evidence. But you've got to keep that management of that thought process in line, because otherwise it runs rampant, telling you all the things that are wrong or missing about you. And then that leads to step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I should have numbered these two. Leads to step number 5. Redirect your thoughts. Don't let your brain just run off like a toddler telling you about how you're not good enough, so-and-so is better, and all of these, you're not worth the rate, all of these things that are just what happens on default. If you let your brain go off on its own tangent versus taking control of it, noticing it's there, using these couple of steps over here and redirecting the thoughts about what it is you really want to believe about yourself. Why on earth would you spend time thinking all of these things on purpose that are not to your benefit? They happen on autopilot, and that's what we want to get control of, and then redirect to thinking positive, effective thoughts about ourselves. And I'm not trying to tell you here to make up something that isn't real, right? Like I'm an amazing acrobat when it's not true. But what we're talking about here is you giving yourself credit for what you know, for your experience, for yourself as a subject matter expertise versus discounting it. And then gather that evidence to support what you want to believe, not the evidence to support what your brain is going to offer you by default. Those are the 6 steps. And I'll give you a kind of a summary of those in a 3-step process at the end. Okay, let's dive into a couple of case studies here, just to kind of drive home the point of how this process shows up, how the imposter process shows up, and then how to manage through it. So I'll give you my case study as an example. I, in January, I think it was, signed up for an advanced coaching certification program. So it's not my first certification, it's the next certification. I love continuing education and continuing to develop my craft and my skills. So I signed up for this advanced coaching certification. Well, I didn't sign up for it. I had to apply and I was accepted. And it's with a very well-known coach who in my kind of coaching community, who is, everyone wants to work with her. So I was super excited at first to get in, and then the panic set in. I started thinking, and I saw the other coaches who were accepted, and the panic grew even more. These coaches are more famous than me, which meant they're better than me in my mind. This instructor, this like famous instructor, is going to see right through me as soon as I open my mouth. Those are my thoughts. Those aren't super helpful, right? Freaking out a little. Super excited to be accepted, but also incredibly nervous. Insecure, intimidated, inadequate, feeling behind, all of those things. That's what these thoughts created for me. I was like, maybe I could change my mind and do this later. Later in the year, it'll be easier. Better. I'll be better. I'll be more equipped, right? Trying to talk myself out of it. So if I kept going with those thoughts and feelings in mind, I literally would have shown up weird, timid, sheepish, silent, doing the bare minimum to get the certification, but not really putting myself out there to be judged. If I let this default imposter syndrome keep its hold on me. Versus I recognized it, I used my process on myself, and I started thinking on purpose, I belong here. I get to choose the thoughts, right? I could choose to think it was a mistake they accepted me, or I could choose to think I belong here. The one that comes easily is they made a mistake accepting me. That just comes on its own, right? So it takes some effort to think I belong here. Put it on a sticky note. I belong here. I can be a great coach and still be learning. It's okay to not be perfect when I start the course. That's why I'm here, to grow more and be able to satisfy this type of coaching, which is called deep dive coaching. And so when I think these things on purpose, now it's almost April, or it's been 2.5 months. I chose these thoughts. And you know what? I've participated more in this coaching program than I probably have since like elementary school, when I used to raise my hand and then everyone called me a know-it-all, right? Like it didn't matter to me. I wasn't there to prove anything or to show anyone I was a know-it-all. In fact, I didn't know it all. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been learning anything from this course, right? But I was willing to put myself out there in a vulnerable place to coach in front of these other famous coaches and have everyone watch me, including the instructor, and give feedback, ask questions that I probably, that in my mind I thought were dumb, but I asked them anyway and got so much out of this process. So for you, let's use a few more examples that are related more to consulting. So Jack, just a name, obviously not the real name. Jack landed his second consulting client in an organization that was new to him. And he started having these default thoughts. I can't speak this corporate language. I don't know all of these acronyms. I don't have enough internal sponsorship. I don't even know who they are. And they're going to think I'm too slow. Default, right? This is what his brain left unattended is thinking, which created this imposter syndrome, self-doubt and tentativeness and nervousness. And if he let that brain continue on autopilot, he would have sat back, hidden, not asked good questions, feeling like he should already know the answer, not contributed. But he knew this was happening. And so he started thinking these high quality thoughts. I can deliver high quality and not know everything or everyone. I'm capable of developing new relationships and advocates. I can figure this out. Constantly redirecting from this default over here to what really helps move him forward and increase the value that he's delivering to the client. And as a result, he showed up focused more on the big picture, not what he doesn't know. Asking questions, still confident. It doesn't matter that he doesn't know everything. Jane, she was on her first consulting project as an IC. Her default thoughts were like, they're going to think they're overpaying me. They made a mistake, which makes her feel worried and underqualified. And if she let that toddler keep control in her brain, like that movie Inside Out, have you seen that? Whoever's at the control panel, she would show up defensively, proving they're paying her the right amount, trying to prove they're paying her the right amounts, or overly available, feeling like she better be available 24/7 or they won't think she's worth it. And then undermining her credibility as a result, because she kind of is a little bit of a doormat. Her shift in thinking, what she can think on purpose to overcome this imposter syndrome. I have value to offer. I can figure out how to add value here too. Doesn't matter if this is my first consulting project or not. I know what I'm doing. And if I don't, I'll figure it out. And her result is asking great questions and listening and not feeling like she has to prove herself. Figuring out how to build a reputation and not being just this one who's always available that the client then doesn't respect as much. She's kind of turned into, this default turns her into kind of a gopher. So this is what this process looks like with some case studies. So in summary, the formula that we went through, I gave you those 6 steps, and you'll see it in the slides when I send out the replay on Monday. But number 1, be aware. Use your feelings as a first light indicator. Figure out where you're feeling insecure. It's totally normal. Don't just shove it under the carpet, hope it goes away. Like, address it. Give yourself permission to have those high quality thoughts about yourself and find evidence to prove what you're thinking is right versus looking for the evidence of where you're wrong or inadequate. So some examples of those high quality thoughts. I know so much already, and I know how to find answers and solutions to what I don't. I'm great at this, and it's okay that I don't know everything. Simple things to think through that can help you overcome this imposter syndrome and show up confidently versus defensively or in some proving energy. Okay, that is what I have for you today.